Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be with you today, and I hope you're all keeping well. Using the NIV translation, today's reading is taken from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 13, verses 24 to 30, and verses 36 to 43. Jesus tells the parable of the weeds, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed ears, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, 'Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then have the weeds come from?' 'An enemy did this,' he said. And the servants asked him, 'Do you want us to go and pull them up?' 'No,' he replied, 'because while you are pulling up the weeds, you may uproot some of the wheat with them. Let them grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters to collect the weeds and tie them into bundles to be burned, and then to gather the wheat and bring it into my barn.'" Later, Jesus left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Master, can you explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field?" Jesus answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. The good seed are the people of his kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out from his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear." This is the gospel of Christ.
Well, it's a huge pleasure and privilege to be with you today as I record a short sermon for and a Holy Communion service for Sunday the 19th of July, as although we are separated in our different homes, we get to be together in worship via video. My name is Richard Frank, and until just a few weeks ago, although it feels like years ago, I was vicar of All Souls Church over near Isleworth and Twickenham, part of that small family of churches like St Saviour's, planted originally by St Stephen's. And it's been a joy for those 15 years that I was vicar there to partner with you in the kingdom of God. And it's been a huge privilege and pleasure over these last few weeks as Archdeacon to be involved in the interview process that has resulted in appointing Alan as your new vicar. I'm really excited by this new chapter that's coming for St Saviour's. Really excited to see what God's going to do in you and amongst you and through you to your local community. So thank you for having me with you here today. I became Archdeacon on the very first day of lockdown. It was an interesting day to start a new job, and all of us over these last 16, 17 weeks have walked through a world that feels really unrecognisably turned upside down from the world in which we celebrated Christmas just 7 months ago. Everywhere we look, we see a world that feels just a thoroughgoing mess, and worse than that, a world that feels shot through with evil, with destruction, with suffering. Some of us have seen the effects of the pandemic in our own lives or the lives of those we love. We've seen its impact on those who are the poorest and most vulnerable in our own communities, but also we've looked with concern, with compassion, on those in other parts of the world, so vulnerable to the effects of this virus as it spreads through the world. But at the same time, we've been brought up short, some of us for the very first time, some of us for the umpteenth time, by seeing the pandemic of racism through our world, as human beings dare to treat others as if they are less valuable, less precious than we ourselves are. And in the midst of all of that, we have seen, maybe just out of the corner of our eye, sometimes coming into focus, that long pandemic of climate crisis, as the world responds to our use and abuse of what God's given us, and as we see the impact it has, again, on the poorest and most vulnerable in our world. As you and I have walked through these 16, 17 weeks together, and as we've seen daily a world that just feels riddled with evil, how should we respond? How do we react when the world isn't as it's meant to be? There's a temptation, of course, simply to run and hide, to put our heads under the duvet, as it were, and to wait for it all to go away. I guess, too, there's a temptation instead to run headlong into it with a sort of zealous zeal that tries to force God's hand and tell him, we need you to sort it out today or tomorrow at the latest. How should we respond? Well, in the reading that we've just had read for us by Vin, it seems to me that we hear some words of Jesus that are exactly what we might need to hear today. That as we've heard this parable in Matthew 13, literally a story that compares one thing to another, we hear some words of Jesus that I think help us to respond to a world that is broken and in need. What we find is Jesus taking some huge truths, some vital truths about what God is like and about his purposes for and in the world that we experience, and putting them in simple, concrete terms that we can grasp and get our heads around. This parable of the wheat and the weeds is about a farmer who has a field and sows it with a purpose. He doesn't just throw some seed out and walk away and forget about it. He sows wheat in this field with the purpose of a harvest, getting a crop at the end of it. And at the end of the story, we see that harvest brought in, the crop is realised, his purpose is absolutely fulfilled. And in between those two times, between on the one hand the sowing and on the other hand the harvest, we see an enemy. The enemy has a different purpose. His enemy is to spoil, to ruin the crop. He plants weeds. And these weeds that Jesus names as he speaks actually are weeds that the first hearers would have been familiar with. They look like wheat until they are fully grown, at which point you see that they have no head. They have no crop. And in the midst of seeing a field that feels like it is being ruined, the farmer's servants react. Now, they could have reacted with a sort of passive, depressed cynicism. They could have looked at this field and went, well, it's ruined. We'll go off somewhere else and do some work elsewhere. Instead, they actually react with panic. The panic of thinking our farmer's purposes have been thwarted, or they're about to be thwarted. There's never going to be a harvest. There isn't going to be a crop. We must do something. We must do something right now. Let's go and pull up all the weeds. Panic or passivity? Panic or giving up? Now, actually, you and I could react the same way as we look at the world around us, as we see the evil that's there. But it seems to me that what Jesus gives us is a tension to hold between what we see now and what is yet to come. A tension that we can hold that will transform the way that we respond to the world that God's given us. And that tension has to do with, on the one hand, a straightforward realization of the reality of the world in which we live that is, yes, riddled with evil, but a certain confident hope in what is to come. A certain confident hope in the harvest that God will bring. So how might this help us? Well, it seems to me that as we hold this parable, as we try and live out a healthy response to the world around us, that it helps us with three attitudes. The first is simply realism. The followers of Jesus Christ ought to be the most realistic inhabitants of this planet. We ought to have the most clear-eyed view of a world that is shot through with evil. This parable helps us to look straight in the face of that which is wrong in our world, and yes, that which is wrong in our own hearts, to see evil for what it is, to speak against it, to work against it, to fight against it. Not to be afraid of it, not to run and hide from it, but simply to speak of it as what it is, evil, planted by God's enemy, not part of God's purposes, not part of God's future, but real and today. But at the same time as realism, this parable also should give us determination. The followers of Jesus should be the most determined to live out and to speak out and to pray into God's purposes of the kingdom that is to come. You and I, because we see the evil for what it is and because we know God's purposes are coming, should be absolutely on the front line of living out a taste of what's to come. And knowing that every word we speak, every action that we act out, every prayer that we pray, even if nobody else ever sees them, and even if in themselves they feel insignificant, that every act that is part of a taste of the kingdom that is to come, every single part is eternally significant and precious to him. So whether you're caring for somebody in your home in a way that nobody will ever see, whether you're working as a volunteer in the food bank, whether you're speaking against the evil of racism, whether you're making changes in your personal life that will help impact the climate for good, whether you're praying for miracles of healing and of insight, as you live out the life of the kingdom to come, you're doing something that will last through the harvest into the life of the world to come. So this parable gives us the gift of realism, it gives us the gift of determination, and it also gives us the gift of hope. Followers of Jesus should be the most hope-filled people on the planet, because we know that the farmer planted this field with purpose, and we know that this farmer one day will bring in the harvest. We don't need to panic, because however much we see the weeds of evil, even in our own lives, let alone in the world around us, this parable tells us that the farmer will harvest his crop. Evil will be destroyed. God will draw a line under history. And his kingdom will come. Earth and heaven will be brought together. Our dwelling will be with God, even as he is with us. We will know God face to face, even as he already knows us. There will be no more sickness, no more dying, no more loneliness, no more pain. The life of the kingdom is coming. We see glimpses of it. We taste a sort of savoury of it. We hear the noise of it. But one day we will see it fully, face to face. This is a wonderful parable. It's a parable for today. May God give us the gift of realism to see the world as it really is. May he give us the gift of determination to live out the life of the kingdom. And may he give us the gift of hope that because Jesus came and lived that perfect life, that because Jesus came and died in our place to deal with the evil in our own hearts and the evil in our world, and because Jesus rose from the dead, we know for certain that his kingdom will come, that the harvest will be brought in, and we will be part of that harvest of good, and into eternity live with him. Amen.